I mean, I was told by my film professor, there are films and there are movies. And sometimes you've got to know what you're walking into.
Yeah. See, but I come from a time when movies were films.
The Boy and the Heron, released on December 8th, comes to us from Studio Ghibli and comes to us from Miyazaki as well. In animation, Miyazaki and Ghibli are really highly looked upon for very valid reasons. The Boy and the Heron, no different, clocks in at 2 hours and 4 minutes, and I was really excited for this film this entire year. One of my most anticipated films the entire year, seeing it get so much love at different award festivals like TIFF and New York Film Festival. I've been really yearning to experience this film, and I've been honestly really jealous watching everyone give it a 4.5 out of 5. I've been really sitting on the bench waiting for my time to shine to watch this movie. Now, I'll admit I was very excited for this movie, but I don't really know too much about it going into this film, which kind of affected just the way I watched it as well. All I really knew about was that it was from Miyazaki, it was from Studio Ghibli. It may or may not be Miyazaki's last film ever. And also the original title for this movie was How Do You Live? So I knew going in, this is going to be a very dark, gloomy film. Not really the type of animated film we see from studios like Pixar or Sony. No offense to them, but this film is very dark. It's a much darker movie just in general, not just animation. I definitely had a pretty fun time with this movie, and it's overall one of my favorite films of the entire year. Now, before ripping into this movie, it's fair for me to point out that I'm not really too big of a Ghibli fan myself. I know that Carter is. We had Carter on an episode a couple months ago. He said that Howl's Moving Castle was his favorite animated film ever. I got a chance to watch that movie. It's absolutely incredible. I have a newfound love for Studio Ghibli just because of Howl's Moving Castle. But overall, I don't really enjoy his films too much. I never really gravitated towards them growing up, or even as I start to watch more movies. I don't really tap into Studio Ghibli that much. I've only seen Howl's Moving Castle, My Neighbor Totoro, and Spirited Away. And Spirited Away, a lot of people say it's 5 stars. I gave it 2.5 out of 5. I have Over the Hedge rated higher than Spirited Away. I don't really have any shame in that whatsoever, but a lot of people are definitely upset at me for that. So as a non-Ghibli fan going into this movie, or at least someone who isn't really tapped into as much as others, I definitely just didn't have too high of expectations. I just wanted it to kind of happen in front of me and just kind of soak in what it provided. And what this film provided was nothing short of absolutely excellent. I think that Miyazaki shows that he really doesn't need to stop making movies. He's just showing no sign of slowing down. We talked about it before with Scorsese, but Tarantino says that directors and artists just get bad as they age, but Miyazaki proves that at 80 years old, he's still just producing art that really is just jaw-dropping. I mean, this movie is firing in on all cylinders of just masterful creativity and animation like I've never really seen before. I was really jaw-dropped by just so many sequences. I mean, starting out with the score, it's absolutely breathtaking. The animation is beautiful. I really miss 2D animation. It's really something that we really need in today's animation era. I know that Spider-Verse is really propelling animation forward, but I just miss the classic 2D. I think this film will show that 2D animation can still provide an incredible film. Also, the comedy for this film is surprisingly top-notch. I mean, this movie is unintentionally one of the funniest films of the entire year. My theater was literally uproaring with laughter at a lot of sequences, and rightfully so. It's just witty and fun and everything that I want out of a Miyazaki movie. Another aspect that reminds me why I love these movies is just the world itself. The way it's drawn, the way it's presented to us. It feels alive. I feel like Alice in Wonderland when this movie came on. Not only just the fantasy aspects, but just the characters as well. This movie feels lived in. It feels alive. I feel like I'm just witnessing this whole other world happening in front of me. It doesn't feel like story beats, but it just kind of flows effortlessly. And I'll admit the movie does kind of take its time to start. I mean, I feel like this movie doesn't get going until the first 30 minutes into the movie. It's just a lot of slow-paced storytelling here, which I don't mind too much at all. I think it just really has time to breathe and time to just slowly build momentum that really just moves quickly on later in the middle of the movie. I got a chance to see this film in IMAX, a pretty packed theater of loyal Miyazaki fans, and it's just so cool to me seeing how much people are impacted by this studio. Just these movies that are fake, it's just a script that people read off of in a little booth, but it still is beautiful how it impacts people. Majority of the audience was really in their 20s to 30s, maybe 40s even, not a lot of children. I mean, that kind of shows maybe the target audience for these movies and how it's kind of written to maybe suit that in a way. In all honesty, this is a kid's film. It's not like it's rated R, but it doesn't really feel like it's a kid's movie or very approachable or watchable for a child to watch. I'm not saying they can't, but there's definitely a very fine distinction between something like a Miyazaki movie and then a film like something from Pixar or Disney or like Cocomelon or Baloo, completely different than what this film's trying to do. I mean, the original title is How Do You Live? That really says it all, and The Boy and the Heron sounds like it's the next upcoming Disney film, not so much this very dark existential film that we get to witness. So it's definitely understandable why the audience for this film, particularly my audience, was a little bit older, more on the younger adult to just adult range. The 20s to 40s, that's kind of how this film seems to be targeted as. The Boy and the Heron is also the first ever Studio Ghibli film to be presented in IMAX, and in my opinion, there's really not a better way to view this movie. I think this is the definitive way to watch this film. I think that The Boy and the Heron is one of the best IMAX presentations of 2023 by far. It's definitely within the top 5 of the year for IMAX presentations, up there with Oppenheimer, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. The IMAX for this film is so good that I don't really see myself watching it in any other format. So in addition to the incredible visuals for this movie, what's really the backbone of any good movie? The writing itself. And this film potentially may be Miyazaki's last film with Studio Ghibli, and the themes really invoke that feeling so much. I mean, not only the original title speaking so many words of just how do you live, but really the crux of this movie, going to its core, really the bare bones of this entire film is so simple of his relationship with his mother. That's really what this film is trying to do, and it does that really personally. It feels very personal. It's a semi-biographical film, so there's a little bit of his life in there as well, and it feels so personal to him that he gets this film right. I mean, when we talked about Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon, I talked about just how he's getting older, and as directors age, the films just become a little bit different. They can become just them trying to show that they're still one of the best of all time, or it can really be the director trying to just send a message that they feel should be sent, or really just try to use their arts to really come to peace with just battles that they're fighting inside themselves. I mean, with this film, The Boy and the Heron really is used for just him to reflect on his grief and his loss. I mean, quite literally, the opening of this film, the first 5 seconds might just have you in tears just by how emotional and personal it is. In addition to grief and loss, I mean, him being as old as he is, there's a very big overshadowing theme of just legacy. I mean, his work and his life is finite and his art will live on. He should probably have a successor, or really just if he needs a successor, or maybe just the art is only what matters. There's so much, just a Pandora's box of that conversation that can be talked about forever. So this could be his last movie. Someone at Ghibli said that he's working on more films as we speak, but that, I think, may or may not affect the way we perceive this film. I think that looking at it as his last film makes the most sense, and it adds just another layer of love and passion that I have for this film more than any other movie. I'm definitely here for more Miyazaki films, but if you ask me, should this be his last film, it makes the most sense for it to end here. And I don't want to think of any other film beyond this. I know that it's just every time we get a new Miyazaki film, we're going to come back to the same conversation of should it be his last movie, but I think whatever his next film may or may not be, if it is approached with the same love that this film has, and it has the same level of emotional understanding and emotional maturity that The Boy and the Heron has, we're in for a treat regardless. So as good as this film is, there's definitely some cons that people may have coming out of the movie that should definitely be addressed that I don't really think could be flaws, but just some invalid criticism from people. So with the first con for this movie, it's really, like I said, somewhat of a semi-biographical film from Miyazaki, so he puts a lot of himself into the movie, which I think can be almost a disconnect from the audience. Kind of can leave us a little bit left out of the story. Part of me believes that's somewhat of a pretty big con for the movie, but at the same time, I think that as the audience, we think that we're more entitled to know everything and understand everything about this entire movie and all of the characters, but sometimes less can be more, and we don't really need to know everything, just kind of feel this world. That also kind of brings me into the second point, that the story is somewhat convoluted, and I think that's almost the point of maybe every single Studio Ghibli movie, not every single one of them, but if you look back to Howl's Moving Castle, why is that war even happening? How and why is there a wizard and witch council? That's a lot of cool stuff that we just don't really know about, but that we don't really need to know about either. There's definitely going to be a video out on YouTube explaining every single detail about The Boy and the Heron in 30 minutes or less, but what does that add to the overall movie itself? That may just be me trying to cope with having to pay for the IMAX ticket, but really, like Christopher Nolan says, don't try to understand it, just feel it, and feel the movie and feel the emotion, and it's going to be just the same, if not better, than than you having all this exposition. And the last con that I think a lot of people may have for this movie is that the ending feels somewhat anticlimactic. And I think that's almost the point of a lot of Ghibli movies as well, that it doesn't really have this big final climactic shot at the very end of the film. It kind of just continues. Like I said before, the Miyazaki and Ghibli movies just kind of just happen. They just flow, they just exist. It doesn't feel like a bunch of story beats happening. I think that we're accustomed to having endings be emotionally resonant, but that's not always reality. Once again, a concept like this in a kid's movie isn't going to be as approachable for as many people, like as if you were to watch Despicable Me 4 or 5. Those films are just different. That's a different kind of cinema, a different kind of art than what The Boy and the Heron does, which I'm all here for. So what's the deal with this one? Should you see it? Should you not? I think that you absolutely should see The Boy and the Heron. I ranked it a 4.5 out of 5. I think this is a great film. Not a great animated film, not a great Miyazaki movie, not a good Ghibli movie, but a great film that everyone should see. Now, before I send you guys out to watch some more films, here's our not-so-big podcast segment, The Big Question. If you're on Spotify, you can go ahead and answer this down below. And for today's big question, does The Boy and the Heron have a chance to win Best Animated Feature Film at the Academy Awards? Now, I do love The Boy and the Heron. It's one of my favorite films of the entire year. You could argue it's the best animated film of the entire year. But in all honesty, we know that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is still superior over everyone else. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Court of Cinema podcast. Thank you for listening. If you happen to enjoy it, share it, review it. Keeps the lights on and keeps the fridge full. None of this is possible without you, and I want to thank you for that. You can follow us everywhere down below in the socials. And until next time, I'm your host, Logan, and I'll see you in the movies.